The detention center on Proxima Station hummed with the usual bureaucratic efficiency that the Galactic Council prided itself on. Commander Zethkar of the Vraxian Enforcement Division reviewed the morning reports with satisfaction. Another successful operation had been completed. 37 illegal immigrants had been processed and detained, awaiting deportation back to their world of origin. The humans had been found aboard a cargo freighter that had drifted into restricted council space. Standard procedure demanded immediate detention and processing. Zethkar had followed every protocol to the letter. The adults were separated from the younger ones, as was customary to prevent any coordinated resistance attempts. "Sir." Officer Nixtal approached the commander's desk, his forearms carrying multiple data tablets. "The processing of the human detainees is complete. However, we have encountered some irregularities in the documentation." Zethkar's scaled brow furrowed. "What kind of irregularities?" "Several of the smaller humans appear to be offspring, younglings. Our translators are having difficulty determining their exact ages, but preliminary scans suggest some may be as young as 5 standard cycles." The commander waved a dismissive hand. "Irrelevant. Illegal entry is illegal entry, regardless of age. Process them according to standard detention protocols." What Zethkar didn't understand, what none of the council species truly grasped, was the fundamental difference in how humans viewed their young. While most galactic species produced offspring that were largely self-sufficient within cycles, human children required decades of protection and nurturing. More importantly, the bond between human parents and their young was not merely biological but formed the very foundation of human society. In the detention blocks, the separated human families were experiencing something that would have horrified any human observer. Parents were screaming themselves hoarse, demanding to know where their children were. The younger humans, some barely old enough to walk, cried endlessly for mothers and fathers who had been torn away from them. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the energy barrier of her cell, watching as guards led her 6-year-old daughter Emma down a corridor toward the juvenile holding area. The child looked back, with tears streaming down her face, reaching desperately toward her mother. "Please," Sarah shouted in broken galactic standard. "She's just a baby. She needs her mother." The guards paid no attention. In their culture, young ones were weaned and independent within a single cycle. They couldn't comprehend why these humans were making such a commotion over natural separation procedures. Dr. James Morrison, a xenobiologist who had been traveling with his family to establish a new research station, tried to explain to anyone who would listen. "You don't understand. Human children aren't like yours. They need constant care. They'll die without proper attention." But his words fell on deaf ears. Literally, in some cases, as many of the guard species couldn't even hear the frequencies of human speech without translation devices. Meanwhile, in the sterile confines of the juvenile detention area, something was happening that would soon send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The human children, separated from everything familiar and safe, were beginning to shut down. The youngest ones had stopped eating entirely. Several were showing signs of severe psychological distress that the medical scanners couldn't properly interpret. 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez had appointed himself protector of the younger children. He gathered them in a corner of their holding cell and told them stories, trying to keep them calm, but even his brave facade was cracking as hours turned into days with no sign of their parents. "When is Mommy coming?" asked little Emma, her voice barely a whisper. Tommy wiped his own tears and pulled her closer. "Soon. Mommy's coming soon." But deep down, he was beginning to lose hope. The situation might have continued indefinitely, following standard council procedure, if not for one crucial oversight. The cargo freighter that had brought the humans had been carrying more than just families seeking asylum. Hidden among the civilian passengers was someone the council definitely did not want to antagonize. Colonel Marcus Reaper Harrison was returning from a classified mission deep in Covenant space. The former Special Operations Commander had officially retired from active service. But unofficially, he still handled the kind of problems that required solutions the human government couldn't officially acknowledge. Harrison had been traveling under civilian cover with false documentation, which meant when the ship was intercepted, he was processed as just another refugee. The Council's scanners detected his military-grade implants but classified them as medical devices, a common misidentification when dealing with human technology. For 3 days, Harrison had remained quiet in his cell, observing the facility's routines and security measures. He had noticed the crying humans and the distressed children, but had assumed they would be released once the bureaucratic process was complete. It wasn't until he overheard 2 guards discussing the disposal problem of the non-viable juveniles that Harrison realized the true scope of what was happening. The medical officer says several of the human younglings are failing to thrive, one guard was saying to another. Refusing nutrition, showing signs of systemic shutdown. Regulations state that non-viable detainees should be euthanized to prevent the spread of disease. Harrison felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. He had seen combat across 17 worlds. He had faced down alien nightmares that would drive most beings insane. But the casual discussion of murdering human children sparked a rage that burned hotter than plasma fire. That night, Harrison began his work. The security systems of Proxima Station were considered state-of-the-art by Council standards. Force fields, automated turrets, bioscanners, and redundant monitoring systems protected every corridor and chamber. What the designers hadn't accounted for was a human who had spent 30 years learning how to break things that weren't supposed to be breakable. Harrison started small. A loosened power coupling here. A corrupted data packet there. To the station's automated systems, it looked like routine maintenance issues, nothing that would trigger alarm protocols. By the second night, Harrison had mapped the entire facility through careful observation and had identified every guard rotation, security checkpoint, and emergency protocol. More importantly, he had located the juvenile detention area and confirmed his worst fears. The human children were dying, not from violence or disease, but from something the Council couldn't measure or understand. They were dying from the simple, devastating fact that they had been torn away from their families. Human children, unlike the offspring of other species, needed more than food and shelter to survive. They needed love, comfort, and the security that only their parents could provide. Harrison realized with crystal clarity that he had perhaps hours before the Council's solution was implemented. On the third night, Colonel Marcus Harrison stopped being a retired soldier and became something much more dangerous. He became a parent fighting for children who weren't even his own but belonged to his species, his tribe, his family, in the most fundamental sense that humans understood family. The first guard never knew what hit him. One moment he was walking his patrol route, the next, he was unconscious on the floor with his security codes extracted and his communication device disabled. Harrison moved through the corridors like a ghost, decades of training allowing him to avoid sensors and navigate by feel through the darkened station. When he reached the juvenile detention area, what he saw nearly broke his legendary composure. Dozens of human children lay listless in sterile cells, some barely breathing. The youngest ones were unresponsive, their small bodies shutting down from trauma and separation. But they were alive. And that meant there was still time. Harrison began uploading a signal burst to his military communication implants. It would take time to reach human space, but when it did, it would trigger protocols that no one in the Galactic Council was prepared for, because the one thing that the galaxy had never truly understood about humans was simple. Threaten their children, and they would move heaven and earth to respond. And in this case, they would move a lot more than that. The emergency signal that Colonel Harrison transmitted from Proxima Station traveled through hyperspace at maximum compression, reaching Earth's military command structure in just under 18 hours. When the automated systems decoded the message, alarms began screaming throughout the Pentagon, the European Defense Council, and every major military installation on Earth. General Patricia Vance was pulled from her morning briefing and rushed to the Secure Communications Center. As she read the decoded message, her face went through a series of expressions that her aide had never seen before. Confusion, disbelief, and then a cold fury that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "Confirm this intel," she ordered. "I want triple verification within the hour." The confirmation came back in 47 minutes. 37 human civilians, including 14 children, were being held in detention by the Galactic Council. Some of the children were reported as failing to thrive and scheduled for humanitarian euthanization within the next standard day. General Vance activated the most classified protocol in human military doctrine. Code Blackout. 7. It was a designation that had never been used before, created for a scenario that military planners hoped would never occur: the systematic endangerment of human children by an alien government. Within minutes, every human ship within 50 light-years of Proxima Station received new orders. Military vessels broke off from their current missions and began converging on the target coordinates. Civilian ships were commandeered under emergency wartime powers. Most importantly, the message was transmitted to the one ship that the Galactic Council definitely did not want involved in this situation. The UEN's Retribution was humanity's newest and most advanced battlecruiser. Fresh from its shakedown cruise, and loaded with weapons that had never been tested in actual combat, Captain Sarah Mitchell had been looking forward to a routine patrol mission when her communications officer nearly fell out of his chair. "Captain, Priority Alpha transmission from Earth Command. Code Blackout 7. Code Blackout 7. Mitchell had been in the service for 22 years and had never heard those words spoken aloud. "Are you certain, Lieutenant?" "Yes, ma'am. Message authenticated with command codes. We are ordered to proceed immediately to Proxima Station and secure the release of human civilians and children being held in illegal detention." The captain looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. Each one reflected the same mix of determination and barely controlled rage. Navigation. Plot a course for Proxima Station. Maximum burn. Weapons. Begin charging all systems. Communications. Signal the fleet. We're bringing everyone home. But the military response, while swift and overwhelming, was only part of what was about to descend upon the Galactic Council. Because Harrison's message had also reached other recipients, and they were mobilizing resources that no government could deploy. Marcus Chen, Sarah's husband and a successful shipping magnate, received the news through carefully maintained back channels. His 6-year-old daughter Emma was on that station, and he had the kind of wealth that could move mountains. Within hours, he had purchased 17 cargo haulers and filled them with emergency supplies, medical equipment, and civilian volunteers. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Tommy's grandmother and one of the most respected pediatric psychologists in human space, organized a response team of child trauma specialists. They departed Earth on the fastest civilian transport available, carrying equipment specifically designed to help children recover from severe psychological trauma. More importantly, news of the detention began to leak through human civilian networks. It started as rumors on colony message boards and social media platforms, but as confirmation spread, something unprecedented began to happen throughout human space. The reaction was immediate and absolute. Merchant ships changed course to converge on Proxima Station. Research vessels abandoned their missions. Tourist liners diverted from their scheduled routes. Even individual humans with small personal craft began making the journey, despite the impossibility of reaching the station before the crisis would be resolved. It wasn't a planned response. There was no central coordination or government directive. It was something much more primal and terrifying. An entire species mobilizing to protect its young. Back on Proxima Station, Commander Zethkar was beginning to realize that something had gone very wrong with what should have been a routine detention operation. His communications officer had been fielding increasingly urgent messages from the Council Oversight Committee, demanding updates on the human situation. "Sir," the officer reported, his voice tight with stress, "we're receiving transmission requests from multiple human ships approaching our position. They're demanding immediate communication regarding the detained humans." Zethkar felt his scales ripple with annoyance. "Ignore them. We are operating within full legal authority under Council Regulation 7749. No foreign government has standing to interfere with internal detention procedures." What Zethkar didn't understand was that the approaching ships weren't operating under government authority. They were operating under something much more dangerous: parental authority backed by advanced weapon systems and absolute determination. In the detention blocks, Colonel Harrison had begun the delicate process of reuniting some of the children with their parents. Using his stolen access codes, He had managed to transfer several of the youngest children back to the adult holding areas during shift changes. The effect was immediate and profound. Children who had been listless and unresponsive suddenly perked up when they saw their parents. Adults who had been consumed with frantic worry began to function again when they could hold their children. But Harrison knew this was only a temporary solution. He could feel the tension building throughout the station as more ships appeared on long-range sensors. Soon, the Council would have to make a choice: release the humans peacefully or face consequences that they couldn't imagine. Dr. Morrison, now reunited with his 8-year-old son Peter, approached Harrison during one of his covert visits. "Colonel, the other adults have been talking. We know what you're doing. How can we help?" Harrison studied the scientist's determined face. "Doctor, what I'm planning next isn't legal, isn't safe, and probably isn't smart. If it goes wrong, it could make things much worse for everyone here." "Colonel," Morrison replied quietly, "they were going to kill our children. Legal and safe stopped mattering the moment we learned that. What do you need?" The plan that Harrison outlined was audacious, even by Special Forces standards. But as he explained it, he could see understanding and approval in the eyes of every parent in the cell. They weren't soldiers, but they were parents. And that made them dangerous in ways that the Galactic Council was about to discover. The first phase would begin when the human ships arrived in 3 hours. Harrison would use the station's own security systems to create chaos and confusion, while the parents executed coordinated actions throughout the detention facility. The goal wasn't escape, which was impossible with children aboard a space station. The goal was to create enough pressure to force a political solution. But as Harrison prepared for the operation, his military implants detected something that changed everything. Long-range sensors showed that the approaching human ships weren't following standard fleet formations. They weren't even all military vessels. Some of the signatures were completely unknown, suggesting civilian craft that had been heavily modified. More disturbing was the energy readings. Several of the ships were showing power signatures that exceeded anything in Harrison's classified knowledge of human military capabilities. Either Earth had developed new weapons in the months he'd been away, or desperate humans had created something entirely unprecedented. As he watched the sensor data, Harrison realized with growing amazement that he wasn't just seeing a rescue mission. He was watching an entire species declare war over their children. The Galactic Council had made the worst mistake in their diplomatic history. They had threatened human young ones and given the humans time to respond. Soon, they would learn why that was such a catastrophic error in judgment. The first human ship to reach Proxima Station wasn't military. It was the cargo hauler, Murphy's Law, owned and operated by Jack Murphy, a 70-year-old veteran whose granddaughter lived on one of the frontier colonies. When he heard that human children were in danger, he had loaded his ship with everything he could think of that might help and pushed his engines past every safety limit. Commander Zethkar watched the approaching vessel with growing irritation. "Signal that ship to maintain distance and state their business." The response came back in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "This is Captain Murphy of the Independent Hauler. Murphy's Law. I'm here to pick up some kids. You're gonna give them to me, or I'm gonna come over there and take them." Zethkar's scales flushed purple with indignation. "Inform that vessel that they have no authority here and will depart immediately or face the consequences." Murphy's reply was short and unprintable in most languages. But Murphy wasn't alone. Within the next 2 hours, 47 more ships emerged from hyperspace: military cruisers, civilian transports, converted cargo haulers, research vessels, and craft that defied easy classification. They formed a loose perimeter around Proxima Station, not threatening but unmistakably present. Captain Sarah Mitchell, aboard the Retribution, opened a communication channel to the station. "Proxima Station Control. This is Captain Mitchell of the United Earth Naval Ship Retribution. I am formally requesting the immediate release of all human civilians currently in your custody." Zethkar, now thoroughly alarmed by the size of the human fleet, responded with bureaucratic authority. "Captain Mitchell, the beings in question are illegal immigrants who entered Council space without authorization. They are being processed according to established regulations and will be deported to their world of origin upon completion of standard procedures." "Commander," Mitchell's voice carried the kind of calm that made experienced spacers nervous, I'm going to explain something to you that clearly wasn't covered in your cultural briefings. Those aren't just illegal immigrants. 14 of them are human children. And you've separated them from their parents. The age of the detainees is irrelevant to their legal status, Zethkar replied, though something in the human's tone was making him increasingly uncomfortable. No, Commander. You're wrong about that. Let me tell you what you've actually done. You've committed what humans consider to be one of the most heinous crimes possible. You've kidnapped children. And not just any children. You've kidnapped human children. Mitchell paused, letting that sink in. Do you see all these ships out here? That's not a government response. That's parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and neighbors. That's humans who heard that children were in danger and dropped everything to help. Some of them traveled hundreds of light years to be here. Inside the station, Colonel Harrison was monitoring the communications while preparing for his planned operation. But as he listened to the exchange, he realized that his military solution might not be necessary. The humans outside weren't just threatening force. They were demonstrating something that the Galactic Council had never encountered. An entire species that would collectively sacrifice anything to protect its young. Dr. Rodriguez, the shipping magnate who had purchased 17 cargo haulers, opened his own channel to the station. Proxima Station Control. This is Dr. Marcus Rodriguez. My granddaughter Emma is on your station. She's 6 years old, weighs about 40 pounds, and has never been away from her parents for more than a day in her entire life. I'm offering to trade my entire shipping fleet, valued at approximately 4 billion credits, for her safe return. Before Zethkar could respond, another voice joined the channel. This is Dr. Sarah Kim aboard the medical vessel Mercy. I'm here with 37 volunteer pediatric specialists. We have medical equipment specifically designed for treating traumatized children. Commander, the human children on your station are dying. Not from disease or injury, but from psychological trauma. They need their families to survive. The communications board lit up as more voices joined the channel. Parents offering impossible ransoms. Doctors explaining the psychological needs of human young. Veterans recounting their own experiences with trauma and separation. Scientists detailing the biological imperatives that drove human protective instincts. But it was the final voice that made Zethkar's blood run cold. Proxima Station Control. This is Admiral Chen Wei aboard the UENS Judgment. I am the commanding officer of the Terra Defense Fleet. I need to inform you that as of 6 hours ago, the Human Colonial Council has formally declared the detention of human civilians without due process to be an act of war. Zethkar's hands shook as he activated his emergency communication to Council headquarters. This is Proxima Station, requesting immediate guidance. We have a developing situation with multiple human vessels and escalating diplomatic pressure. The response took longer than usual, suggesting hurried conferences and emergency meetings. When it came, it was from High Counselor Veltar himself. Commander Zethkar, you are ordered to maintain current security protocols. The Council will not yield to intimidation tactics from any species, regardless of the size of their fleet. The detainees will be processed according to regulation. But even as the High Counselor spoke, reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. Human ships were converging on Council space from every direction. Trade routes were being abandoned as merchant vessels headed toward Proxima Station. Research missions were being terminated. Even human diplomatic staff were requesting emergency leave to deal with a family crisis. The galactic economy, which depended heavily on human shipping and trade, was beginning to feel the impact. Stock prices were plummeting as major human corporations suspended operations. Supply chains were breaking down as cargo haulers failed to make scheduled deliveries. Inside Proxima Station, something else was happening that would later be studied by xenosociologists for decades. The human adults, knowing that their children were safe but still separated, had begun to organize. Dr. Morrison used his scientific background to analyze the station's life support systems. Sarah Chen, an engineer, studied the power distribution network. Other parents contributed their own expertise in communications, logistics, and systems management. They weren't planning escape. They were planning to make the station uninhabitable until their children were returned. Colonel Harrison watched this civilian organization with growing admiration. These weren't soldiers, but they were fighting for their children with the kind of methodical determination that he had only seen in the most elite military units. "Doctor," he approached Morrison, "what you're planning is impressive, but it's also going to be seen as an act of terrorism by the Council." Morrison looked up from his analysis of the atmospheric recycling system. "Colonel, they separated me from my son for 3 days and threatened to euthanize him. They stopped being a legitimate government the moment they did that. As far as I'm concerned, we're prisoners of war planning an escape." Oh. Outside the station, the human fleet had grown to over 200 ships, but more importantly, word of the situation had reached the Galactic Trade Federation, the Merchant Alliance, and a dozen other economic entities that depended on human commercial activity. Captain Mitchell received a priority message from an unexpected source. Zexhan Tulvar, the Kelleran trade minister and one of the wealthiest beings in the galaxy. "Captain Mitchell, this is Minister Tulvar. I have been monitoring your situation with great interest. I want you to know that the Kelleran Merchant Consortium is prepared to support any reasonable solution to this crisis. The humans provide 37% of our shipping contracts. If this situation continues, our economic losses will be catastrophic." Similar messages came from the Vegan Medical Cooperative, the Centauri Mining Guild, and even the normally isolationist Altarian Research Collective. The galaxy was beginning to realize that humans weren't just angry parents. They were angry parents who controlled significant portions of the galactic economy. High Counselor Veltar found himself facing something unprecedented: economic warfare conducted not by governments but by families. The final pressure came from an unexpected source. The station's own AI system began receiving data from the human children's continuous monitoring. Bioscanners designed to prevent disease outbreaks were instead recording the systematic psychological deterioration of young humans separated from their parents. The AI, programmed to prevent loss of life under its care, submitted an automated report. Medical emergency detected. 14 juvenile humans showing signs of critical psychological trauma. Recommended treatment: immediate reunification with parental units. Commander Zethkar stared at the report in disbelief. Even the station's own systems were turning against him. At exactly 1400 hours station time, he made a decision that would change his career and possibly save his life. Opening a channel to the human fleet, he spoke words that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. "This is Commander Zethkar to all human vessels. We are prepared to discuss the immediate release of all human detainees. I formally request a negotiation team to come aboard and arrange transfer procedures." The response from Captain Mitchell was immediate. "Commander, we're sending over a delegation. But I want you to understand something. This isn't a negotiation. This is us accepting your surrender." 6 hours later, the last human child was reunited with their parents aboard one of the waiting ships. The civilian detainees were processed through emergency immigration protocols that granted them immediate asylum status. Colonel Harrison was officially listed as having been found in good health during routine prisoner transfer. But the real victory wasn't the rescue itself. It was what the galaxy learned about humanity that day. They learned that humans would sacrifice their economy, risk war with superior forces, and abandon everything else in their lives to protect their children. They learned that threatening human young ones wasn't just dangerous, it was civilization-ending stupid. The incident at Proxima Station became mandatory study material at every diplomatic academy in the galaxy. The lesson was simple but vital. Humans would forgive attacks on their colonies, their ships, and their governments, but threaten their children, and they would move entire fleets to respond. Council regulations were quietly amended to include special provisions for human families. Young humans, the new protocols stated, must never be separated from their parental units under any circumstances. Such separation constitutes a threat to the health and safety of the juveniles and may trigger unpredictable responses from adult humans. It was the most polite way the Council could think of to say, "Don't mess with human kids unless you want to fight their entire species." The galaxy learned to live with that knowledge. And parents everywhere slept a little easier. knowing that if the worst happened, their fellow humans would move heaven and earth to bring their children home.